It is my pleasure to welcome the 13th president of Stanford, Jonathan Levin, to the stage. Welcome, John.
Yeah.
So John was my advisor, so I get to embarrass him a little bit. First, let me talk about his professional accomplishments, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how I know John personally. So John started his academic journey here at Stanford. He earned undergraduate degrees in English and math, which I think is just about as cool as it gets, from Stanford in 1994. He was also the leader of the kayak club. I've seen videos, I think, on LinkedIn of him doing this flip thing. I don't even know what it's called in a kayak. It's super cool. I'm sure you can find it. From Stanford, he went on to get a master's at Oxford on a Fulbright, a PhD in economics from MIT. John joined the Stanford faculty in year 2000. He was the chair of the economics department from 2011 to 2014. He's widely recognized for his scholarship on topics that range from incentive contracts, subprime loans, auctions, health insurance markets. He's done important work at the intersection of research and economic policies, a member of the White House Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. He's been on groups to design mechanisms to advance global health and to allocate spectrum. Among other awards, he's won the John Bates Clark Medal, which is given to the best economists in our country, age 40 or younger. He's won numerous awards for his teaching, which are richly deserved. He's been a SIEPR Senior Fellow for years. So John moved into university leadership in 2016, taking the reins of the GSB. In that role, he strengthened the GSB's position as the preeminent business school, investing in new research programs, financial aid for students, and many other initiatives. In August 2024, he became Stanford's 13th president. You can read all of that in Wikipedia. Like I said, I knew John before he was famous. I was a PhD student in economics here at Stanford, and John taught me fall quarter microeconomics, which I think is just about the most foundational class in a PhD curriculum. In my second year, he taught me industrial organization, which is the study of firms, competition, and markets, which became one of my two fields. John invited me, you may not remember, to be an RA on a project on health insurance markets. He then promoted me to co-author. That became my first academic publication. He was my main PhD advisor. He helped me land my first job. I have had the great fortune of meeting and working with many brilliant people, Nobel laureates, CEOs, cabinet members. John is as smart as anybody I have met. John has also seen me at my least impressive. He's heard me pitch my most harebrained research ideas. He's seen me give my worst research presentations. He has never once made me feel bad or discouraged. As an empiricist, I have observed that smarts and kindness are not always correlated in our society. It's an unfortunate feature of the world that the people who are highest up on the ladder of success sometimes are the least kind to people who are working their way up. John is the outlier data point in this statistical regularity. He is the kindest, brilliantly smart person I know. He is the most brilliant, deeply kind person I know. I am hugely lucky to have had him as a teacher, as an advisor, as a mentor, and now as a boss. We at Stanford are hugely fortunate to have had him as a faculty member, department chair, dean, and now president. Welcome to the summit, John.
Thank you, Neale. It's going to just be downhill from that introduction for the rest of this session. So,
I figure university presidents are getting beaten up enough where I might as well push in the other direction.
there we go. Thank you.
So I have some questions for you, if I can find my notes, but we should just sort of head in any direction you would like. So you've been in the job for 6 months. You picked an opportune time to be leading an august institution like Stanford. What has excited you about the job? Any surprises? Do you want to vent? It'd be a little bit of a therapy session.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and welcome everyone to the SIEPR Summit. This is always such a great event every year at Stanford, and it's particularly wonderful to do it in your first year as director, Neale. I'm very proud of you to see you up here on the stage. So I started, as Neale said, I started as president at Stanford in August, and actually it's been a wonderful year in the sense that I got the chance in the fall to just go out all around the campus and talk to people and just be reminded what an extraordinary place this is in terms of the breadth of students and faculty and clinicians and alumni and friends of the university, and Stanford is a place where basically any question you're interested in, there is someone on this campus who is a world expert on it, and some amazing students who are aspiring to do something about it. And where else can you have that experience of walking onto a campus where that is true? So it's been that's been a joy. It's a very challenging in some ways, but also a very important time for universities right now, and certainly in the last couple of weeks and so forth, we see that in some ways the whole social contract that underlies great universities like Stanford is being reevaluated and debated, and that's an important moment for us to basically be clear and articulate the incredibly important and distinctive role that great universities play in the country in terms of being the source of ideas, the engine of innovation, the place where the most talented young people everywhere in the country and around the world want to come, and a home of debate and dialogue and all the things that we're going to model here today at the SIEPR Summit. So in that way, yes, there's lots of articles saying who on earth would want to be a university president, but actually it's a great job to be a university president, so I'm really thrilled to be in this role.
So you're an economist. You spent the majority of your career conducting research and teaching. You're now in a very different role. What skills from your career as an economist translate to running? Must be close to a 20,000 person organization.
So that's an interesting question. I mean, you said it very well a few minutes ago about the training you get as an economist, and that is just important generally, which is economics is such a wonderful discipline for trying to figure out how to organize problems conceptually and then bring evidence and data to bear on them and then use that to make decisions. And that's an incredibly valuable skill in any leadership role, to be able to structure problems. It's not sufficient to be an effective leader, but it's a necessary condition to be an effective leader. And that's really great. And of course, there's certain things around the university that are where there really are true economic problems, like the whole business model of the university, and how does that work, and how do you set strategy, and how do you manage the finances and the organizations. I'll say the other piece is, I was at a parents' night the other night, and I got a question about undergraduate majors, and basically like which ones did a good job of preparing you. You said before that I started my career, I did math and English. And I will say that, one of the amazing things about being a student at Stanford is you have the opportunity to basically study anything at the highest level. And when I got that question about majors, I was reflecting on the fact that when I started my career early on, I used my math major all the time because I went into economics. It's a very mathematical field. You're using that analytic part all the time. And the more I've gone on in my career, the more I use my English major, because it becomes more and more important to be able to articulate ideas and to put yourself in the shoes of other people and to think about broad questions about, what is really important in people's lives and careers. And those are the skills of the humanities. So I actually have been very fortunate here at Stanford to get to be part of a lot of different disciplines, I think all of which go into helping to be effective in a leadership role.
No, that's a profound answer. So let me actually ask a question sort of the other side of this coin, which is, what do you miss the most about research and teaching?
By far the thing I miss, I thought when I went to become a business school dean, I thought I was going to miss teaching a lot, and what I realized was I was always teaching, because I was always meeting with students and talking to them, and it wasn't a classroom setting, but it was the same. The thing that I really miss about being a faculty member is just the freedom to think about ideas, and it is such a privilege to be a Stanford faculty. It is the best job in the world to be a Stanford faculty member, actually, because you just have unlimited freedom to walk into the office every morning and you can do whatever you want. I mean, you can decide, like, I don't think I'm going to think about that anymore. I just read this interesting article in the paper. I'm going to think about that for the next month. I mean, where else can you get paid to do something like that? And then you've got all these people around you in the office and students like you, and you just get to bat ideas around and ideate, and I miss that a lot.
So let me ask you then about something that maybe you've been thinking about in this role, which is the world seems like it's changing maybe faster than ever. Changes in the economy, especially with respect to AI, I think create, I guess the phrase is overused, but challenges and opportunities, for everybody, including universities. How, from where you sit, are you thinking about how we can sort of meet the moment and be prepared for the future?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's a couple of pieces in what you said. I mean, I think you alluded, for example, to technology, and even absent the policy issues facing universities, the technology changes that are facing universities would be profound. And maybe we can talk about that. But let me say something about the policy issues, which is the basic model that made many universities great, and certainly that made Stanford great, is a partnership with the federal government. Stanford was founded in the 1890s, and Stanford was basically a good regional university up until the period after World War II. And the thing that turned Stanford from being a good regional university into a great national university and global university was the US science and technology strategy after the Second World War, to invest in basic science and to locate that basic science in universities and to set up merit-based competitive award systems that faculty could compete and be funded to do research. And the folks running Stanford at that time were some of the first to recognize that this was the future and to invest in that. And then at Stanford, we took it one further, which was not just to do great science and publish it and let people build on it, but to come up with a model to take those ideas out into the world and to create the entrepreneurial and innovative ecosystem that's Silicon Valley that has basically powered the entire country for decades. And that was an extraordinary development. And it's such an asset for the country, and of course it's so special to be part of it here, and it's an asset for the world. And right now, essentially there's just that whole model is being called into question much more than it has in decades. And so this is just a particularly important time, in my view, to sort of just to re-identify that strategy as a core pillar to the country's strength and to the way we move forward and solve problems in the world and cure disease and develop new technologies that benefit everyone. And that makes this just a especially critical time for universities and their role in the country.
I had another question in my list. I think that builds off of this, which is better understanding the connection between the teaching and research we do at Stanford and the entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, much of it led by Stanford graduates. I think I have a statistic, 29% of Stanford alumni have tried to start their own businesses, and just, I think, providing some more color for that symbiotic relationship and how we maintain it in the face of some of the headwinds.
Yeah, so there's an element to what you just said that actually I think deserves some, just to be called out, which is you said the relationship between research and teaching. So U.S. universities have a model that is not the model that's used everywhere in the world, and it's not the model that's been used at all points in time, which is that and Stanford was one of the first to do this when it was founded, co-locate frontier research with undergraduate liberal education. That is actually not an obvious thing to do. It's a brilliant model because it's basically a way to take the great scholars of today and pair them with the brightest minds of tomorrow. And when it works well, there's the learning is bidirectional. The students come in, they ask questions, that causes the faculty to think. I have a research paper that I wrote years ago that started as a talk that I gave to the summer undergraduate students who were research assistants in the economics department. I was trying to explain how college admissions worked. And I wrote down a little model for them, and I ended up, after Jeremy Beulah, who was the editor of the American Economic Review, said, "You should just publish that. That's really interesting." Writing that as a research paper. There's many, many stories like that. And, of course, the students get a chance to be exposed to the frontier of research. And, of course, graduate education, is much more integrated with the research, and SIEPR plays an important role in both. The entrepreneurial part is really distinctive to Stanford. I mean, and it's pretty remarkable. If you look today, and what is the most important technology that's today? It's probably artificial intelligence. What are the most important companies doing artificial intelligence right now? It's Google, it's NVIDIA, it's Tesla, it's OpenAI, it's Anthropic, all founded by Stanford alumni. And that's incredible that we've created this system. And by the way, everyone says now that universities are maybe a little behind in areas like AI because of the sort of compute needs and so forth. But if you look at the ideas that underpin all of the models, all of the statistical methods, neural networks, gradient descent, the sort of deep learning type of models, machine learning models, these all came out of academic research. And some of them came out of recent research, and some of them came out of research that was done decades ago and sort of sat around waiting to be picked up when the time was right. And that's an amazing contribution that the university makes, both through its ideas and through the students who get educated to pushing the innovation frontier forward.
So I want to open it up to questions, but I have, I think, maybe one or two more. Maybe I'll finish with this. We have some students in the room. If you could give advice to students on how to make the most out of their Stanford experience, but also prepare themselves for a dynamic, uncertain future. Doesn't have to be one piece of advice. If you could give them some advice, what would it be?
Well, I can tell you what I told the incoming freshmen this year. So this year, the freshmen came in, that was in September, and this is fun part of this job. I get to welcome them and their parents in Convocation and Frost Amphitheater, which that's a great setting to welcome people to Stanford because the beautiful blue California sky, and you're out in this open environment. And this year I talked about Socrates, actually. There's a philosopher at the University of Chicago, Jonathan Levin, who has written brilliantly about Socrates. And what Jonathan says about Socrates is that people would come to Socrates and they would come with different theories and arguments about justice or piety or whatever it was, and Socrates just asked people questions. And then after a while, people would get frustrated and puzzled, and they'd run off. And Socrates just stood there. And Jonathan says, Socrates stood still because he was comfortable not knowing. And that's a good lesson for students coming to university today. College is really more about asking questions than having all the answers, and being comfortable not knowing and just being able to ask questions and pursue ideas. That's a great thing that hopefully students can both model when they're at the university, but take away with them when they leave the university.
So that's a perfect setup for some questions from the audience.
And I won't have any of the answers, so that's...
Thank you, John. I'm right here. I read that the universities, when they get grants, there's a 50% overhead that is put on to the grant. Isn't that double dipping because the university already has the overhead paid for? And is that one of the reasons why Stanford has got a freeze on hiring, is that you're going to lose some of that 50% overhead?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. That's a really important issue right now. So the question is basically about the structure of federal grants and the way these are done. So the federal grants are administered by all different federal agencies. The NIH is by far the biggest. Stanford is the recipient. Stanford faculty, not the university. Stanford faculty are the recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars of NIH grants every year, and that covers everything from clinical trials to cancer research to basic science, a huge spectrum of different biomedical research. We also get NSF, DoD, lots of different other federal agencies. The way those grants are structured, and this goes back decades, and in truth, it's a little arbitrary the way it was done. There's some logic to it, but it's just historical structure. There's two parts to the grant. There's an award that goes to the investigator to pay for the people who work in the lab, maybe a salary for the investigator, some equipment or supplies, reagents, what have you, that are used directly in the project. And then there's a payment that goes to the university to cover things like building the lab, putting in the basic equipment that's shared across all of the different people who are working in a similar area. There's some money for administrative costs and overhead, and those are called, for reasons that I'm sure people now regret, are called indirect costs, which makes it sound like they're some random other side thing, but in fact they're not. And there's rules about those, and so just to give you an example, at Stanford, if an investigator, if you get $100 that goes to the so-called direct costs, we could get, depending on, we have to show all the expenses and they're audited and so forth, we could get up to $54 in indirect costs that go along to support the basic research infrastructure. In practice, we get about 39. So if doing it another way, if we get $100 from the federal government, about 72 goes to the PI, and about 28 goes to support the underlying infrastructure. That's a number you could debate. Should it be 26? Should it be 24? Should it be 32? It's a perfectly reasonable debate. The NIH announced earlier this year that they were going to cut the number way down and make it uniform across all universities. That's hung up in the courts right now, but it's going to be in Congress later this year, undoubtedly being debated. And And that's there's legitimate arguments you can have about exactly how to structure it. I will say at Stanford, many universities get these grants and are funded. So for example, the University of Alabama at Birmingham is a very large recipient of biomedical research grants. The University of Pittsburgh is a very large recipient. The University of South Florida has a medical center that does a lot of biomedical research. So there's many universities that are affected. One of the things about the way Stanford does research is we do a lot of co-investment with the federal government. So we put in, for every $100 we get from the federal government, probably close to 50 cents that comes as a co-investment from essentially philanthropy to the university. And you can see that if you walk around the university. So if you go over to the engineering quad and you look at the names on the buildings, Gates, Allen, Yang, Huang, Shriram, and so forth, those buildings are there full of labs, full of researchers. They were paid for by our alumni and by philanthropy, and then the federal government is paying to outfit the labs and for the equipment and so forth. So, I think there's part of the criticism right now of universities is that we're bureaucratic and inefficient, and we should run, we should be really efficient stewards of the taxpayer dollars. That is absolutely correct. It's 100% valid, and we should do everything we can. I mean, if you run on taxpayer dollars, you got to be responsible doing that. And if you look at the overall cost of federally funded research in universities, it's a really good deal in some sense for the country. Every study of investment in university research has found that $1 put into university research and science has a payoff of multiple dollars over time in social benefits. And so that's important to keep in mind. We're going to have a debate over the course of this year about exactly the structure and the funding, and that will have a big impact on our budget. But I hope the country doesn't lose sight of how important the investment is. Almost anyone who's looked at this seriously has concluded that the federal government should put more money into R&D as opposed to less money in R&D, and that would be good long-term for the growth of the country, our military capabilities, our geopolitical strength, our economic strength, and hopefully that will be remembered as we go through the debate this year over some of the specifics of these grants.
Thanks very much. I'm Mitchell Watt. I'm a PhD student here. I guess my question is related to that discussion you were having at the end there and the hiring freeze you announced yesterday. My understanding, and maybe you can correct it, is that the administrator to student ratio at Stanford is more than one. So there's more than one administrator per student here. How is Stanford going to run a leaner institution, I guess, going forward in terms of administrators? And secondly, do you see there's possibly some unintended benefits of the current administration's sort of anti-university policy that might come from running a leaner institution?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So just to say one thing, the numbers about, at least at Stanford, the numbers about sort of faculty to student to staff ratios, they're very complicated to parse out. And part of the reason, one big reason they're complicated to parse out is that Stanford runs a giant academic medical center. We run a $10 billion clinical enterprise at Stanford. And it's not totally separate from the university. A lot of clinical staff are within the university. And so when you see these numbers, you sort of have to remember that this would be a little bit extreme, but we're a small university attached to a giant clinical enterprise at some level. So you have to be a little careful about thinking about who these people are. Most of them are a lot of them are taking care of patients, which is providing a really wonderful service to the community and the world. Having said that, I think by any measure, if you look across universities over the last 20 years, at most places, and I think Stanford is included in this, the number of faculty has grown slowly, the number of students has grown slowly, and the overall enterprise has grown much faster. And that's a good thing to look at and try to see, has that been a good thing? Has it been a bad thing? We do much better at creating new things at universities, particularly at Stanford, than we do at getting rid of them. I think that's just a basic fact of universities, just like it is true for the federal government. And so, one good thing about having the federal government come in and scrutinize, are you running efficiently and effectively, is it will force us to look at that over the coming year and try to figure out how can we run the university more effectively. And the focus of the university is on faculty and students and research and teaching, and that's the budget of the university should track those core priorities of the institution. From just a leadership standpoint, it would be much nicer to think about sort of doing some of those things without the top line of our budget falling very quickly, which it may do also in the course of the year. There's a lot of uncertainty about that. But you're completely right to say that there will likely be some positive benefits in the long run from having to look really hard at what we're doing and do we need to be doing those things and how do we run effectively.
Mary Bitterman. One of the things that's obviously very important for universities and many other entities are endowments. The foundation I head, the Bernard Osher Foundation, has really been committed to endowments to provide for permanent support over a long period of time. And obviously Stanford has a significant endowment. Sometimes people say they have so much money they don't need any more. But now that there is discussion of an increased tax rate on that, I thought it would be helpful just for everyone to understand that, because when you read some of the little bullet points, it doesn't really reflect the complexity and the importance of endowments. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right to say that the endowment model is widely misunderstood, and people think that university with a large endowment like Stanford is fortunate to have basically has sort of either Fort Knox and you just need to crack open and get the gold bars out to do things, or in the extreme that the provost has a sort of printing press for money in her office and why don't you crank that thing up whenever there's a problem. I mean, this is an economic summit, so I think I think probably the misunderstanding is not widely shared in this room, but I will say, I mean, the endowment model, you could run a university differently. You could run a university on a year-to-year operating basis and with a small amount of reserves and so forth. It would be a different model. It would be more volatile. It would be harder to make long-term promises. And the part of what makes universities are institutions that are the most successful ones have been around for a very, very long time. Stanford's actually pretty young in the space of the great universities, but it should be around for a long time, and we should run it as if it's going to be around for decades or centuries. And to do that, you want to be able to make promises to people when they come in. When you recruit a faculty member, you want to say the university will still be great, even greater, in 20, 30 years as your career goes on. When a student comes in, you want to be able to say the university is going to continue to be on an upward trajectory for many years, and then we should deliver on that. And to make long-term promises, you need to match assets and liabilities. And not that the faculty and the students are liabilities, but the promises are but the promises are liabilities if you're sort of doing accounting. And so you need assets that can back up those promises, and the endowment structure is a way to have long-term assets that you can make long-term promises against. And philanthropists to the university understand that, and they want to make long-term promises. They want to put money behind something that's going to go on for a long time. And in that sense, it's a great structure, and it's something to be celebrated, not sort of attacked. It's just. But right now, I think people are looking at it a little bit differently, and so undoubtedly, when this year's tax bill is debated, it's already starting to be debated. The tax that was put on the endowment returns in 2017 is going to be one of the topics, and that's partly because of the fiscal situation of the federal government. Although the money involved here is tiny from the perspective of the federal government, it's just a minuscule amount. and partly because of what I think is a valid criticism of the most successful, financially successful and successful universities, which is there's a sense that we drifted away from many people in the country and got out of touch. And we have to take that critique seriously. And we have to think really hard about it and do some reflection on that particular criticism. I hope it doesn't come by having the endowment taken away from us. It shouldn't, but we should do it regardless.
Hi, John, and thank you so much for the transparency of your remarks. Could you kind of put everything together and talk about your vision for the university while you're president?
Thank you for that great question to allow me to get on my soapbox for a second. That's nice of you. So one of the things that was really wonderful when I started was I got to have my inauguration also in Frost Amphitheater, and that was right at the beginning of the year, and it gave me a chance to think really hard about what it was that I thought was so important about great universities and distinctive about Stanford as a great university, and also what the future might look like. And what I talked about there was first the very unique role that great universities play in the world as I said before, as the source of ideas and innovation and opportunity for students. And what was so special about the way Stanford carries out that mission of discovery and learning, which to me is really tied up with the way Stanford was founded out here in California in the American frontier as a place of exploration and openness and possibility, which were the things I fell in love with when I came here as a student and brought me back and kept me here all those years in the faculty. And what I talked about in that inauguration was all on that theme of openness, that I thought a vision for the university was that universities needed to be open-minded in terms of the types of discussion and perspectives that we collected on the campus and the way we engaged around them. We needed to be open to new ideas. We needed to be fearless in pursuing the frontiers of knowledge, whether that's AI today and data science or biomedicine or humanities, social sciences. And we should be open to educating more people, finding more ways to expand the way we share knowledge with the world, whether that's through our undergraduate class or through other ways to reach a larger number of people with the ideas of our faculty. And I think those are still the right things. I think if I had to go back and do that talk again today, I would add more about the relationship of the university with the country and the sort of social compact that sustains universities, which is a compact with everyone we are a global university, but we're also an American university. And the social compact with the country is really important to sustain the university in terms of making sure we're clear about what we contribute to everyone in this country and the way we engage with the country as a whole. And I think we're being reminded of that right now, and that's essential. And that can happen in a lot of ways. It can happen through being open to more students around the country, to having generous financial aid that makes it an opportunity for more students, which we really do have. By the way, if you're in the bottom half of the U.S. income distribution, that's your family is, Stanford is free. Tuition is zero after financial aid. That's extraordinary, actually. And also to being open and sharing our ideas and making sure that the great things that are learned here get out to people, whether it just enriches their lives or creates innovations that make their work and their life better.
We have a panel on sports later.
Yeah.
But how do you see the importance of sports, particularly basketball and football, given the new world we're in right now?
You asked me, you said short answer. That's so difficult. I mean, Stanford has an incredible tradition in sports. I mean, just unique among universities. And I mean, you'll hear it in the panel today because you're going to hear from some people who are really involved with the university. But the whole world of sports college sports has just changed so much. And the big challenge for us right now is we have to find a way to be successful in a world where college sports are getting professionalized and there's all kinds of crazy absence of rules and chaos. And the most important thing at Stanford in sports is to, first of all, we're different. We run sports differently than other universities. We do compete with Ohio State and Texas on the playing field, but we also compete with Princeton and Harvard in the classroom. And when a student athlete comes to Stanford, we expect them to excel out on the field, but we also expect them to excel academically. And they're Stanford students first. That's the most important thing about being a Stanford student athlete is you're a Stanford student. And so that's really, really important. And we also need to figure out how to have a model that's financially sustainable, and we should win.
So it's been a delight to have you here. This conversation has been great, I hope. All of you enjoyed it as well, I think. A round of applause.
Thank you, Neale.